Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Thursday. Um, I'm going to say hi to some people and then we're going to dive in. So, Basil's here. Good morning, Basil. Hadil is here. Good morning, Hadil. Michelle is here. Good morning, Michelle. Um, let's do this. So, yesterday we were talking about First Nations cultures in British Columbia. We were reviewing some technology that people on the northwest coast here have had developed in the past, and so there's quite a array of technology that people would have used, and of course the skills to use it and create it are pretty astounding, right? If you needed rope, could you make rope? I don't know how to make rope. like you go to Home Depot and you buy it. I don't know how to make a rope. Like, how do you do that? But of course, Indigenous people figured it out, right? They made ropes, they made nets, spears, fish weirs, boxes, fish lures, harpoons, clothing, hats, houses, drums, masks. All of these things were created by these people just with the materials that they had in nature. And so pretty astounding, right? So I showed you here some hunting implements, some of them for fishing, some of them for hunting. I showed you some drawings and photos of a fish weir. I showed you, this is an artist's rendition, and it's pretty romantic, but still, this is how some indigenous people hunted whales before. So with harpoons and floats, as you can imagine, pretty dangerous. Whales don't like to be poked with things, as nobody does, but they were successful, right? Here's an indigenous person using a fishing spear. This was a little video of a fish weir that I had. It doesn't really look like much. Salmon drying racks, nets for scooping up these small fish that they would collect oil from, and they would dry them on these massive racks. Baskets that were woven together for collecting roots or berries or nuts or shellfish. Really amazing skills that people had, right? They didn't have sort of modern technology as we do, and they didn't have sort of modern materials, but they were able to take from the environment and build the things that they needed, right? We also said that in terms of technology, Indigenous people manage the environment to some degree, and so they kind of, they would do some weeding of places where food would grow. Sometimes they would burn down parts of the forest to encourage new growth. They would transplant fish eggs from one stream to another, or clams from one bed to another. And so, Indigenous people understood how their environment worked, and they knew how to kind of help it along so that it would be more productive for them. And so they did just that. Just talked about that. People, of course, also cooked their food. So they collected food from the natural environment, but they also cooked it as well. And so sometimes it was boiled, sometimes it was cooked in an earth oven, where you basically bury a massive quantity of food and then you build a big fire on top of it and let the fire burn for a few hours. And then when you dig all the food out from underneath, it's all roasted and soft and tasty. Lots of cooking technology going on. What else is there here? We talked about cedar. We talked about the idea that the cedar tree is of critical importance for people on the northwest coast because they built so many things from it, right? All their tools, their houses, in some cases their clothing, their hats, masks, all kinds of things were built from cedar, from either the bark or from the wood of the cedar tree. And so that's a nice big cedar right there. Again, you'll see them around Vancouver. If you go to Stanley Park, although you may not want to go to Stanley Park now because their coyotes seem to be attacking people, but you'll see these trees, and they smell very characteristic. They smell very nice, but they also they're very useful for building tools and for building things that people needed. Yeah, a hat woven from cedar bark. Incredible craftsmanship, right? The skill to do this, unbelievable, right? Yeah, they made canoes out of these cedar trees as well. So I showed you some pictures of cedar canoes yesterday. This one from 1890, so a little bit older. Some paintings, and then kind of a modern day version. Again, one single log that's been hollowed out with a stone axe and shaped into this canoe. We said that Indigenous people in the past and in the present were weaving textiles. So they were weaving blankets and cloth and things like that, sometimes from plant materials, sometimes from animal materials. And so I showed you this example of kind of a blanket that someone might wear kind of over their shoulders. And you can see there's a lot of intricate designs woven into the fabric, and it's pretty fantastic, I think, anyway. We said that Indigenous people on the coast had a bit of a hierarchical social organization, right? So there were chiefs, there were leaders of each clan. Becoming a chief was a hereditary thing, and so if you were a chief, that's because your father was a chief and his father was a chief before him. And each clan kind of controlled access to resources. So each clan would have certain resources or areas of the land that they controlled access to. Some clans would have different ritual knowledge. Some clans would be responsible for different rituals throughout the year. And so to be part of a clan was to sort of have some degree of power in society in terms of, granting people access to resources or performing certain rituals. Okay. Yeah, so again, there's no single authority here. There's no king, there's no emperor. There's just clan chiefs that have to, either work together or fight it out, right? And we said that warfare was reasonably common as well. So, yeah, sometimes you would have clans that were in conflict, and they would fight it out, right? Let's see. That's too much information. We don't need to go there. Oh, we talked yesterday about cradle boarding, right? So the idea that in some places on the northwest coast, in the past, not anymore, but in the past they would bind the heads of their infants, right? And so this created kind of a slight cone shape to their head, which again, some northwest coast people thought was quite attractive, right? I don't know if I agree with that. I think it's kind of strange, but Adol's like, no. But again, standards of beauty vary from culture to culture, right? What's beautiful for one culture might not be beautiful for another one, right? And this is simply another example of that. And even all along the northwest coast, if you went from like California to Oregon to Washington to here up into Alaska, if you went all the way along the northwest coast, you would find some groups that did this and some groups that didn't, right? And so again, the people who shaped their crania, they would say, oh, those round-head people, they're so weird, right? And us round-headed people would look at this and say, oh, that's really weird. And so again, there's this cultural differences. It doesn't do anything to people. Like it doesn't impact brain growth. It just changes the shape of how your brain grows. But it's fine. It doesn't, the skull as it's growing is kind of plastic, and so you can shape it a little bit to some degree, and so they did. But I wouldn't recommend you. Don't try that at home. We read an article yesterday on myths and spirits and shamans, if I recall, and let me just see here. Do I have it? Oh, there it is. Perfect. Okay. I asked you a few questions, and one of the questions I asked you, what was the purpose of myths in First Nations culture? Yeah, it explains different things in their environment, right? The origins of things, why things are the way they are, where things come from, where people come from, where salmon come from, right? There's all these questions, right? And so myths help to answer those things. What else do myths do? They what? Right? They describe natural changes in the natural world, yes? Yeah, they describe that. What else? Yeah. So they help to reinforce kind of ethical or moral lessons, right? They teach us what we should do and what we shouldn't do. And so in that way, even though, Indigenous myths are unique, right? They're different from Indigenous group to Indigenous group, and they're certainly different from other places in the world. In that way, they kind of serve the same function. Right? They do the same things as, the story of Icarus and Daedalus, right? They do the same thing. They transmit cultural values, and they help to explain why the world is the way that it is, right? And so, again, they're kind of, in that way, they're no different from the myths of the Greeks and the Romans. There's just different characters and different things happening, but they serve the same function. The article was talking about transformers. What's a transformer? Yeah, shapeshifters. And often transformers or shapeshifters are tricksters. And again, lots of mythological systems have trickster figures, right? And so trickster figures cause trouble. They shake things up. You need an element of chaos, right? If you've got a story with all these gods and the gods are doing all these things, you kind of need someone in there to cause trouble, right? You need somebody in there to kind of shake things up and get things to happen. And trickster figures do that very well. And so here in the Northwest Coast, actually here in most of North America, the raven is often a trickster figure. Have you seen ravens? Yeah. Ravens are often trickster figures, and coyotes are often trickster figures. And yesterday we were talking about, from the Marvel movies, we were talking about Loki as a really good example of a trickster figure, right? He is a shapeshifter. He does cause chaos and problems. He trips people up. Sometimes he gets himself into trouble, and then he has to figure a way out of it. And at the very least, he's very entertaining, right? You never know what he's going to do. Anything can happen with this guy, and that's kind of what tricksters are like as well. We talked about animism, right? The idea that everything has a spirit residing within it, right? Everything has a spirit residing within it. What's a shaman? What is a shaman? What's a shaman? Yeah, so shamans are people who can interact with the supernatural world, right? They can either enter the spirit world, or they've kind of got one foot in that world and one foot in the world of people. And so they're able to kind of go between, right? And they're able to do things and see things and hear things that others are not able to do. Holy cow! I got a lot of questions here. Let me see. Maybe the last question I'll ask you here. I won't do them all, but did you have a question? Oh, because I don't have a slide with them, but I can, hang on, I can do this. There we go. So, yeah, so those are the questions. I was just going to skip through a couple of them because I wanted to sort of move on to our film, and I do have a few more things to suggest to you, but actually, let me show you those things, and maybe we'll come back to these questions in a little bit. So, some of these myths are creation myths, right? And again, all societies have creation myths, ways in which the gods were formed and the earth and the universe were formed. And we saw that, remember a long time ago, we saw a video of Crash Course, and it talked about the Egyptian pantheon and the Sumerian pantheon. And there was kind of a creation story. And so, again, Indigenous people have creation stories as well that tell the origins of the world and of the universe and how people come to exist and where their particular group comes from. And so myth is kind of, their personal history is tied up in myth usually. I'm not sure what I was talking about in some of these. Again, in lots of these stories, you'll see that the animals are characters. So there's people and usually animals and plants. And because animals and plants have spirits, because they're animistic, they have because of animism, they are they're characters in these myths, and so they kind of sometimes interact with the humans and sometimes teach them important lessons about how to live. Sorry, I've got some extra, here's what I want to get to. I've got some extra slides in there. As I mentioned, I'm still putting this unit together, so I'm missing some pieces and I've got some extra pieces, and it takes time to put it together. This is an important thing to talk about here, is something called Potlatch. We read about it in the article. Do you remember what they said about Potlatch? Remember what the article said? A ceremony that... Okay, so it takes place in the winter, yeah. Okay, so potlatches are ceremonies that take place in the winter. What else does it say? Okay, here, let me give you some stuff here. Okay, now the potlatch is a lot of things, okay? And the first thing we should understand is that it's a very important part of Indigenous culture here on the West Coast. It is, at sort of the basic level, it is a gift exchange. So it's a big kind of gathering where everyone gets together. There's food, there's dances, there's singing, there's people, hanging out and talking and things like that. And at the potlatch, gifts are given. And again, these gifts are kind of an important part of sort of the economic activity of the community, but also they have a lot to do with credit and honor, okay? And so the amount of kind of respect and status that you have in the community is connected to giving, okay? And so again, here in Western society, if you look, we usually seem to look up to people who have a lot, right? We tend to look up to our pop stars and our Elon Musks and people like that who are very wealthy and very successful. But in Indigenous culture here, that's not what's respected. What's respected is how much you can give away, okay? And so at the potlatch, if you're the one to put on the potlatch, if you're sort of the head of a clan, at that potlatch, you will attempt to give away as much stuff as you can, okay? And so you may plan your potlatch for quite some time, gathering up as much as you can, going to people in the community and saying, hey, Adel, remember when I gave you a canoe last year? Well, maybe you can give me a canoe now, right? Pay me back. And so the clan leader will kind of go around and sort of collect as much as he can so that when the potlatch occurs, he can give as much as he possibly can away, to the point where sometimes things are just burned or destroyed because their clan, important men in the community are trying to show the people that, look, this is how easy it is for me to give this stuff away. I don't need all this. I'm just going to give it all away. I'll burn that stuff over there. I don't care. I'm giving. Right? That's how you get status and respect in a community like this. And so again, it's a war of wealth, but it's not gaining wealth, it's giving it away, right? Giving it away to the community. And so it's something called what anthropologists would call a total social phenomenon. So it's got religious aspects to it, it's got mythological aspects to it, there are shamanistic aspects, shamans are taking part. It's economic, and so all of this wealth is changing hands at the potlatch. It's social, right? It's happening in the winter when all of the clans are together, and so everybody, gets to kind of hang out and talk and interact with everybody else. So the potlatch is a big deal, right? And I don't know about your respective societies and cultures. In the West, the closest thing we have to it is Christmas, but it's not Christmas. So it's not Indigenous Christmas. This is the closest thing that we have to it, where if you think about it, at Christmas there's a religious aspect, right? What is Christmas supposed to be about? Huh? Religiously. Yeah, it's about Jesus, right? It's the birth of Jesus. So it's got a religious aspect to it. It's got some mythological aspects to it. So we talk about the 3 wise men and things like that, and the whole story of Jesus and Mary not being able to, find room at the inn. There's an economic aspect to Christmas, right? We buy all sorts of presents for people and put them under the tree and open them and pretend that we like them when we get them. No, maybe you don't have to pretend if you're lucky. It's also a social thing, right? People get together at Christmas with their families and they reconnect and they spend time together. So again, the closest thing we have in Western culture to potlatch is Christmas, but potlatch is kind of bigger than that. It's kind of it's much more of a way of being and a way of life rather than just a simple holiday. But again, the closest comparison is probably Christmas. Again, the chief gains status here by giving, right? By giving more than anyone else. And so if he can if he can give more than anyone else, then he basically shames them. Like, oh, this guy can give so much, he must be the highest status guy, right? He's the guy that gets the most respect. If you go to a potlatch, you will probably be given a gift, because everyone, the goal is for everything to be given away and everyone to receive something. And so, again, you cannot turn down this gift. You must accept it, whatever is given to you. But also, you have an obligation to repay. So it's the kind of gift where you kind of have to give something back, right? So in this regard, think of like a birthday present, right? So if it's Nicholas's birthday in a month and I buy him a birthday present, when my birthday comes around, you should probably buy something for me, right? It's usually how it works. If Nicholas doesn't buy me something, it's going to be like, hey man, like, I got you something, right? So it's the same thing here, is that there's an expectation of giving back, right? And so again, when I gave Adel that canoe last year, and I tell Adel that, hey, I'm trying to put together a potlatch, maybe you can pay me back, I might expect him to give me a canoe, or maybe 2 canoes. That'd be great. 2 canoes, please. But this is kind of how some of these men are able to gain a lot of goods to give them away, right? They give something, and then the expectation is that it gets given back later, but a little more, right? And so what's that? The what? Yeah, the pig. It's very similar to the pig thing, where that was the kapuku, right? The kapuku were exchanging pigs and gaining status by it. And here, Indigenous people are doing a very similar thing. Good catch on that, by the way, Nicholas. They're doing a very similar thing, but it's with all kinds of different goods, not pigs. But yeah, it's the exact same concept, right? It's the gaining status through giving, and kind of shaming other people with your generosity, as it were. Yeah, so there's all kinds of different aspects tied up in the potlatch: economic, social, religious. It's a huge part of what Indigenous culture in this part of the world is about. And so this is a bit of an aside, but if you remember from social justice, we talked about the idea that those potlatches were banned earlier on in Canada's history, right? So imagine this event that is so important suddenly is made illegal. Okay, so that brings me to the video that I would like to show you, and it's an interesting one, I think. It's a local story, so it's about a guy who's from British Columbia here, named Bo Dick, and Bo is an Indigenous man. He's an artist. As you can see, he comes from a small village on the northwest coast of British Columbia here, and he's been very kind of successful in the art world. And one of the things that he creates is reasonably traditional masks. And so Indigenous people at a ritual or at the potlatch would often wear costumes and masks and kind of act out some of the myths that they know in dance form. Okay, and so the costume and the mask are very important. And you'll remember earlier on in this course when we were talking about the kwakwakiwak, and they had the big, yeah. So there's lots of masks and sort of costumes and pageantry that go into Indigenous ritual and dance. And so Bo carves masks from cedar, and his masks are kind of quite stirring and interesting. They've got a lot of personality. He's an excellent artist, but he's also an Indigenous person, and he'll talk about a lot of aspects of the Indigenous culture and experience. And so I've got a few questions for you, as you can see here, and I'm just going to pop them into Student Portal. I'll just let you read them for a second, and then we'll talk about them. And also, I apologize if that was a little rushed, but again, I'm still kind of building this unit or this section of the course, and it's not quite finished yet. So it'll get there. Okay. And oops, wrong one. Okay. So that's posted. Now, so just a few very simple questions here to sort of guide our watching. Number one, the importance of elders in Indigenous communities. What elements of the Indigenous worldview are apparent in the block of wood story? So he's going to tell a story about a block of wood that he carves into something. And so I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. What's a potlatch according to Bo? And so we'll actually see a potlatch. We'll see what one looks like, and we'll get to see Bo at one of these potlatches. At one point, he'll talk about the morality of money and the morality of science, which is kind of an interesting question to discuss. Number 6, how can one be traditional in modern times? Right? So one of the struggles of being an Indigenous person today is that, you know, their culture was kind of changed so quickly that they haven't really had a chance to catch up. And again, they've been treated very badly by the Canadian government, and so part of the Indigenous struggle is trying to figure out how to be Indigenous in the world that's now been created. Because again, this is a country that was not created by them, right? Europeans came here, pushed them aside, and created the country that Europeans wanted. And so now it's kind of a question of how Indigenous people are kind of finding their place within this thing that we've created. And then maybe we'll leave that question till the end. That question might have made more sense in a social justice context, but we'll see how it goes. Okay. So questions are here. The link is in Microsoft Teams for online people. Maybe what we'll do is we'll watch 25 minutes, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll come back and see what we've seen, okay? So online people, I'll see you in about, I'll put the timer up here. I'll see you in about 35 minutes. Yeah, so go watch 25 minutes, take a break, and then come back and we'll talk about what we've seen. Okay. Okay, and we're back. So, a couple of quick questions for you here. The first one, what's the importance of elders in Indigenous communities or in any community for that matter?
They are a source of knowledge
Mm-hmm.
for the young people.
Mm-hmm.
I can speak about my own country.
Sure.
They are very important, especially like taking care of the elders. They have very few. What do you call the place that elders go to?
Like a senior's home?
Yeah, we have very few seniors home because in our culture and religion, the children has take care of the fathers,
Mm-hmm.
and then they have the grandfathers,
Right.
they have the great grandfathers. So yeah, they're very important. They're very respected. As I said, so much knowledgeable about especially black areas. They're people don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? The idea that yeah, the elders are a source of, and I think in the film they kind of mention that you need to spend time with your grandparents, right? To know where you come from, right? To know who you are, you have to know what came before, right? And so there's this kind of grounding in history and sort of who you are and what your family is, and they can pass on wisdom to you and knowledge, and yeah, that's an important part of what the elders are, what they represent in an indigenous community. And again, it's another way in which I think Western culture is kind of at odds with indigenous culture, because I don't know that we really respect our elders very well at all in Western culture. I think we're much more youth oriented, right? Where we seem to put much more, we give much more respect and status to people who are young and beautiful and innovative and who have new successful ideas. I feel like we give a lot of attention to that, but we don't really give, and money, and we don't give. Or were you offering me money, or were you just? Oh shoot. Okay. Okay, I was excited for a moment. It's like, oh, he's okay. He's going to give me money. Yeah, we tend to respect those things, but not so much the wisdom of age, right? Bo tells that kind of block of wood story, right? And so, if we just listen to that story, and I don't know, it's mildly entertaining, I guess, but if we listen to his story about the block of wood, what kind of elements of indigenous culture or indigenous ways of seeing the world can we kind of pull out of that story? What can we pull out of that story? A couple things, maybe. Yeah, what can we learn about indigenous culture by listening to that block of wood story? What? Oh, animism? Okay. How so? How so?
Was an importance to if it weren't if there was another word we could probably be gone.
Yeah, there seemed to be this block of wood seemed to be like communicating with people, right? So there was the first owner, the block of wood came from a log that was lying on his on his beach, and he cut it all up into pieces and he burned all of it. But for some reason this one piece was like, something about this piece, I'm going to hang on to it, right? And The same thing with the guy who acquired it afterwards, right? He was working for the guy and he was like, something about that block of wood, right? It's kind of speaking to people. And then finally, how does it speak to Bo? When he was drunk?
Yeah, he was kind of drunk.
Was he kind of drunk? I don't know. I think maybe I missed that part. But he was. Sorry?
The time part when he said he was kind of drunk, and then in the morning when he got up, he saw that he's in bed.
Oh no, I think he like collapsed into bed exhausted because he had been working all day. Oh, he was a workaholic. That's what he said. He was a workaholic. So yeah, he worked until he was just like exhausted and then collapsed into bed. That's what it was. So he saw the block of wood too, right? And he said one day he said, okay, well, what do you want to be anyway, right? And he kind of touched the wood and he got this very clear image of what he should carve this thing into, and he does it, right? But then what does he say after that? And what does he start thinking about after that?
Maybe the tree which the wood has come from the grandparents of the tree being related to his grandparents.
Yeah, he starts kind of thinking back, right? And this piece of wood that came to him was old, right? It was, it had probably spent, it was probably 20 years or 25 years since the tree had been cut. But then before that, like that tree could be 100 or 200 years old, right? And it, how long ago was this tree a little tiny tree growing up, right? And who were this tree's grandparents? And those grandparent trees, he wondered if his ancestors had used that tree to build maybe canoes, right? Or masks themselves. And so he kind of starts thinking back to, the history of these two things, his history and the history of the block of wood, and how their paths kind of crossed together at the right time, right? And he says, yeah, something else is going on here. This isn't just me carving a mask out of a block of wood. Something seems to have brought us together, this block of wood and me, right? And there's this kind of long history of both of us that have brought Bo Dick and the piece of wood that have brought them together, right? And that's kind of interesting to think about how things like that seem to happen, Is there anything else we can kind of pull out of that story? I think those are the big things, but is there anything we might have missed? So we see a bit of a potlatch, and we see Bo at the potlatch. What do we kind of see there? What are people doing? I don't know. I think you were there that was the last part, right? Yeah. There's dancing happening. We could hear the drumming, right?
They have a meeting behind this gathering.
Yeah.
Which they said God is like the womb of the mother, and how it contains them, what does the fire mean to them, and what does the beat of the drums mean, and what God can do for them.
Yeah, it's very symbolic of, they said, like being back in the womb, right? Being back inside of your mother, right? So you're kind of in this sort of dark place. You kind of return, you go to the back of the house, right? So you're in this sort of dark, warm place. What does the fire represent? Yeah, your soul, right? The thing that's burning inside you. What do the drums represent? Yeah, the heartbeat, right? So you're almost like going back inside, right? And it's not like your mother's womb. It's like the womb of like the earth, right? And you're you're dancing on the floor in bare feet because you don't want to hurt your mother, right? You want to be gentle. And so all of these kind of symbolic things are happening. And then the dances that happen are, communicate meaning as well, right? Some of them are myths or stories or, so there's a lot of meaning that's being, and symbolism that's happening within that ritual. What else do we see at the potlatch? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what did they say? That Bo had carved like 30 or 40 masks and then burned them? Yeah, what did you think of that? It's a waste? In a way, yeah, like it's interesting. This is where like, cultural values and cultural meaning kind of gets in the way, right? Because, for his people, it's like, it's a generosity thing, right? He could have taken all those masks and sold them all, right? And there are people who, greatly admire his work, and they'll pay serious money for one of his masks, right? Those are worth money, right? But he doesn't sell them, he burns them, right? And Nicholas said, yeah, gee, that's kind of a waste. And I look at it that way too. I was like, oh my gosh, like, come on, man. Like, you could do something with that. But again, this is how, it's easy for us to, we look at things through our own cultural lens, right? And we interpret them differently. And so, yeah, it's easy for us to look at that and say, oh gosh, what a waste. But within their cultural value system, that's him being selfless, right? Being generous, being like, I don't need to hold on to these masks or sell them. It's just I can give them away, I can burn them, I don't need them, right? Anything else we see at Potlatch? There's the drums and the dancing and the fire. Right? Okay, yeah, the dancing is going on. Lots of people kind of getting together. Lots of gifts are being given, and people are showing what they're given, right? So you can, you kind of bear witness to people's generosity, right? All right. We didn't get to this last point yet, did we? According to Bo Dick, what is art and what can it be used for? We didn't get to that yet, did we? No, I didn't think I heard that either. Okay. So let's see where we are here. Oh, that's where we are. Okay. Did anything else kind of strike you in what we saw so far that was kind of interesting, or that you had a question about, or you thought was neat, or that you thought was not that neat, or? The movie was made, I think, in 2016. Yeah, he's unfortunately he died in 2018, 17. Yeah, so sadly he is no longer alive. So yeah, the documentary is only a few years old, and he recently died, sadly. Although if you own any of his artwork, probably worth a lot more now. But yeah, so he is dead, I'm sorry to say. Anything else? What do you think of the artwork that he's like his masks? They're what? Very detailed, yeah. I think they're cool as anything. I think, yeah.
Since they handmade, not other machines have been involved, except for
ones, and was thinking of the using in
Yeah, all of them are unique, and they're all, yeah, they have a lot of meaning, right? Because they're not mass produced, they're not produced by a machine. You know, Bo sits there and carves each one of them, right? And again, they're meant to, as they mentioned, they're meant to be theatrical props, right? They're meant to be worn and performed, right? They're not just to hang on a wall, although most of them do. Anything else that was kind of interesting or curious or odd or understandable or? Well, in some ways, I think it is. You know, there's currently, I think we've come to a point in our world has become very complicated, right? To the point where, you know, like most of the time we don't even understand what's going on, right? So, you know, it's a difficult world to understand, and I think it's true that their world would have been a little more simple to understand in terms of, you know, their lives were more simple, their lives were less complicated. Again, in our modern society, things have just become so complicated that nobody knows what's going on anymore, and you know that can be a source of stress all on its own. But yeah, I think in some ways it might have been a much more simple way to live, you know, and certainly they would have had challenges to deal with, and there would have been things that they didn't understand, and you know, they would have had struggles of their own. But I think it's probably fair to say that it would have been a little more, life might have been a little simpler back then. Although keep in mind that, you know, the interesting thing about studying anything is the deeper you go, the more you discover. And so, you know, this is just kind of the very, you know, surface layer of what's a very kind of rich and complex culture. We just don't have time to, you know, untangle it all. But yeah, but I think that's fair to say. Anything else that kind of comes out of this film so far? It makes me want to go and carve something, but I know that it's not a good idea. I'm not an artist. What's that? Parts of it take place, so he's living in Alert Bay. That is just up the coast of British Columbia here. So if you could drive straight there, it would probably be 4 or 5 hours. So you just go kind of northwest of here. And it's actually on an island. It's a little bit, it's not on the mainland, but it's kind of up there. So part of it takes place in Alert Bay. Part of it takes place here in Vancouver. We'll see some more tomorrow we'll see some scenes where he's in Victoria. We'll also see some scenes from Vancouver. For a little while, he was the artist in residence at UBC, and so you'll see some footage of him at UBC carving away because they provided him with a studio there, so artists could go and talk to him and hang out and be inspired. Anything else for now? Okay, so come back tomorrow. We'll finish the video. We'll talk about it. We'll try to wrap this course up in some way, and then you will be officially done. Well, once you hand in your final papers, then you will be officially done. Yeah, but until then, hope you have a nice afternoon. I'll see you tomorrow, and we will end this.